Hey everyone, welcome to Chat B2B, the podcast that gives you a front row seat to AI and B2B marketing. I'm your host, Andrew Rao, co-CEO of Intercept, and today's guest is Mike Thibodeau. He's the Director of Enterprise New Business at Google Cloud, and he's lived on both sides of the fence. Marketing at Microsoft, now sales leadership at Google, which makes him a strong bridge between sales and marketing. In our conversation, we asked the big question, are we in an AI bubble? Mike shares what he's seeing on the ground, plus practical examples of how AI is helping sellers assemble the right assets on the fly, using simulations to build real confidence. And if you like what you hear, don't forget to follow or subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. This is Chat B2B. Let's get into it. So Mike, you've lived on both sides, right? Like as a marketer, when you started at Microsoft, which I remember, now sales leader at Google, you've been involved in a lot of different sales enablement programs. We've worked together on many successful ones, though you know that a lot of sales enablement programs fail. And I don't know, I want to get your take on why do you think that is, and what is it that marketers need to either think or do differently to improve that success? Because sales and marketing, right? It's always that age-old fight, and marketing needs to get more involved in sales enablement. So we got to figure this out. So what's your take on it?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of different things we could talk about. I think one that maybe is really relevant to some of the themes of what we'll talk about today are, as part of sales enablement, the marketing teams often believe that that is like building more content, and they're not like completely wrong, right? Sales,
Right.
what are the decks? What are the customer stories? What are
Yeah.
the white papers?
Yeah.
And so they're creating content, but then like in sales, oftentimes things are moving fast and they need the content, but now there's too much content.
Yep.
And so it's navigating those building blocks, because oftentimes the slides or deck that you have that's part of the sales enablement bomb or kit that you're now trying to find,
Yeah.
because there's so many and move so fast, you're sort of trying to figure out like, I actually don't need the whole deck. I just need like a slide or I need
Yeah.
2 slides, and I need to like slightly change it for the context of this conversation. And I think that's really an interesting theme for, some of the AI topics we'll talk about today.
Yep.
But when I started in marketing, which was a while back, there was like the DAM concept, and you'd have like not like
Yeah.
DAM like DAMN, like more like DAM, but
Yeah.
what is the repository for all of the content? How is it foldered? How do you make sure sales knows there's an updated set of slides? They're not using like the favorite ones from 2 years ago that they've banked. And so I think oftentimes it's about sales providing the feedback on what are the pieces and modules that I need to
Yep.
help me better support my conversations with customers. And then from sales, it's like, okay, here's the easiest way to go pull together a bunch of those bite-sized things. So I don't know if that's like a good framework, and it helps us build on some
It
of the
is.
conversation for today. But it's like, can you get that connection right between those two things?
I think you're hitting on a good point, because it is this content sprawl that sales has got to deal with, because as each sort of marketing team, product marketer, integrated marketer that thinks that their campaign is obviously the most important, because that's what's within their purview. Sales has got to collect all this stuff and make sense of it. So there becomes a point where I can imagine on the sales side, what do I use when, with who, with what customer? Like you gotta, just as like you can't overwhelm a customer, you also can't overwhelm sales either. Otherwise, it's kind of it's moot, you know. And then the other thing that was interesting when you said like sort of like these different decks, and how do you make it? You got to use a slide. That's the other thing that like we always talk about, is like, how do you make the decks modular? Because even like a pitch deck, I think still we assume in some cases that sales is going to present that deck from end to end. And it's like, no, they're going to use a slide. So it's like, they got to be able to choose and like make their own mix of it,
Yeah. And I think like, oftentimes in B2B sales and marketing, you'll have like sales plays or solution plays or whatever we
Yeah.
call them. And
Yeah.
there's so many of them, and they're built, and a lot of the content for those campaigns are built with that in mind.
Yeah.
But that assumes a perfect time where you're going to take these 12 sales campaigns and have a discussion with 12 different stakeholders, maybe, or
Yeah.
sequentially stack them. But I think it's more fluid than that. And so when you're in sales, you're talking about maybe the holisticness of the partnership. Maybe two or three of those topics are relevant. And so you're pulling from different areas. And today, this type of a customer story might be what you need, but with the same customer and maybe even the same sponsor at that customer or stakeholder, tomorrow you need a different customer story. So there's never just like
Exactly.
one thing to solve it all. So this idea of like static content, I think is very challenging. And it's sort of led to a lot of where maybe the frustration between
Yeah.
sales enablement from the marketing side often start.
Yeah. I'm going to come back to that sort of static content in a second. I want to ask you the whole like age old debate, like sales versus marketing. Do you think that they need to be separate teams? And the backdrop on that is like, as a good marketer, you need to be thinking through the conversion and like actually what's going to drive revenue. As a good salesperson, sales lead, you got to also think about the brand. I don't know where I land on that, but do you have a perspective on that? Like, is marketing and sales, do they need to be dedicated separate functions, or do we just like blend it together in some sort of future of sales marketing org? I don't know. What do you think?
Mm. I'm no org design expert. I think there's definitely different skill sets. And I think maybe over time, when I started my career as a marketer, I maybe sort of more so realized that that's not my biggest strength, and there's people far better at that. But I've developed an ability to at least understand their perspective and cross that bridge a little bit easier because I've played in both.
Yeah.
Um, and so I do think that there's value in them sitting closer together. So
Yeah.
I don't know if that's the same team or under the same leader, or at least tied by outcomes.
Yeah.
Um, and
Yeah.
I think if you tie people by outcomes, you sometimes will see different behaviors and results. It's sort of, especially like if you're in the world of startups rather than sort of large tech sales,
Yeah.
there's the notion of like product led sales, and you have marketers that are responsible for revenue for direct sales channels, digital direct sales
Right.
channels.
Yeah.
And so I think the behaviors exhibited by a marketer driven to go create direct sales channel revenue aren't too different from the ones that you would want as a good partnership between sales and marketing. And so I don't
Mm.
know if they're definitely not the same person.
Yeah. Right.
Can they be in the same org or under the same leaders so that they work a little bit more hand in hand? I'm sure that would be great. I'm sure there's pros and cons with people smarter than me on org design. But could you tie metrics together? I think
I think that's a
I
great
think
point.
KPIs and metrics drive behavior. And so to your point, if the behavior is, we achieved 1,000 downloads on a white paper, if you brought that metric and KPI that was
Yep.
amazing to a marketer and you said that to someone in the sales org, they would be like, so what? And so
Yep.
that's where the debate starts. And so I think if you align some of their KPIs, the trickiest part is the short and the long term. I think
Yes.
oftentimes marketing will say that they are working on, the longer term of the sales cycle, and that funnel is way longer,
Yeah.
which isn't completely inaccurate. And but I also think that sellers work on short and long term initiatives simultaneously with their customers.
Yeah.
So I imagine there's some way to tie these things together so that they're mutually thinking about the short term and the long term, and not just in quarterly sales cycles or annual sales
Yeah.
cycles. They have like short term and long term objectives collectively, and I think that would help a lot.
I think that's a really key point, because you're right. Incentives is what's going to drive behavior, right? So if marketing is incented to just drive, let's say, marketing qualified leads, versus obviously sales is direct, like quota attainment, quarter by quarter, you're going to get different behaviors. So interesting. Maybe it's two separate teams, or with just shared sort of metrics or KPIs. I'm going to go back to your comment on sort of like static content and like where things are going. In your eyes, what does good sales enablement look like? And is AI changing your benchmark for that at all? Like what does good look like?
Yeah. I mean, from sales, good is the thing you need, you can find and it's there. And anything, oh, it could be the thing that you knew you needed or the thing you didn't know you needed. And so not struggling to have to create it and spend too much time creating, that
Yep.
probably would be a really good benchmark of good sales enablement is I have a good understanding of what's available. I know where to find it.
Yep.
And when I need something that I knew I needed or that I didn't know I needed, that it's there in some shape or format close enough. I think the piece around where AI fits into this is if there's like one thing that we start doing, it's using AI to help us search and bring these assets together in a
Yes.
succinct format. So there's like Gemini, the model, and then obviously appended to Google Workspace is Gemini, which is a large language model and allows you to do things. And I guess the easiest way to think about that is within the ecosystem of your Google Drive and email and calendar.
Yeah.
Similar to like, Microsoft's Copilot, which someone will laugh because I'm on a podcast now and with my Google hat on, still talking about Microsoft. But Copilot within modern workspace acts
Yeah.
similarly. I
Yeah.
think the more powerful tool that I've been using lately has been Agent Space, which
Mm,
still is built on the Gemini model,
I see.
but the power is in those connectors. And so it's connected across multiple applications and sources of information, and it can retrieve information from those things, like my Salesforce CRM, like my calendar, like a drive, or like a workday system. And so it's the pulling together of all of those things that might get you the best answer. And so the dream of help me prep for this meeting, or hey, I'm
Yeah.
responding to an RFP. And in that, you may need a bit of a content response, a legal response, and maybe a path to ask someone else for something. Having that in one system's really powerful. And I think it's been such a game changer. Similarly, in there, I obviously had a podcast that I was running with startups for 2 years. I like
Right.
listening to podcasts.
Yeah.
You can use Notebook LM within there to also take a bunch of content that you're trying to sift through and turn it into an audio file and audio podcast that helps you learn. And I learn well in that way. And so I think those have been really useful bits, and where I'm seeing like Gemini. But both of these, I think, are like one component of like the world of AI that we're all talking about.
Yeah.
And you may have heard me talk about this in the past, Andrew, with this like, what do you build versus what do you buy? I think we even
Yeah.
talked about it a few weeks back.
That's right.
But a company has to determine, and or individuals have to determine like what are the things that you buy or leverage as is, or you're essentially procuring or using SaaS
Yep.
in its current form, its ability to work out of the box or with simple connectors or some simple modification allows you to get pretty far pretty fast. And then where do you need things to be more custom or
Yep.
more unique IP? But what is cool now, I think, with a lot of how agents and AI agents are working is connectors and tasks can be leveraged out of some of these SaaS solutions. They don't necessarily mean
Mm,
custom. So we used to think if it's like out of the box, I needed to also speak with something else.
yeah.
That's not custom anymore. That
Right.
may just be a connector, or maybe you're customizing just a connector. So it's maybe narrowing down where scenarios need to be built. There's still a lot of high value built scenarios, but I think it'll probably come up today. But the the wave of AI, everyone was sort of in this like we have to build something or we have to use AI. They were blurring the lines between what they have to use, what do they have to build, what
Yep.
is the end state, what is the current state. So I do like that those SaaS offerings have gotten me very far, and I use them like multiple times a day in sales, in my role as leadership. Like it's super helpful.
Yeah. Before, to your point, is like you'd have to build most things. Now you can buy it. You can lease them. I mean, it's like the barriers come down, right? You already touched on, by the way, some really powerful, practical, effective AI use cases for sales teams. Are there others that you see as sort of ripe for implementation in sales teams, whether at Google or whether amongst customers too? Any other thoughts there?
Yeah, I think a lot of people, sales or beyond, I think there's this notion because, there's this creative aspect to copywriting,
Yeah.
text, or coming up with ideas or creation of images or video that naturally we're drawn to the content aspects
Yes.
of AI.
Yeah.
And in sales, you're in front of customers. And so you're like, how do I use this for the email that I'm going to write, or to polish an email, or create a video or some piece of 8-second video in a reel, like in social, all these things. I do think that the opportunity where people are seeing a lot of value in AI is in operational tasks.
Yep.
Because like, I'm not saying those other areas aren't valuable, and actually quick segue. I think an important piece is to use it as a companion tool. If you say write an email to Andrew telling him to buy some Google stuff, you're going to get a pretty generic response. And if Andrew and I talk, so the more systems those are connected to, the smarter that response will be. But I still think that like there's an art form to like sharing some inputs that help it customize to you. So knowing your tone and your brand style.
Yep.
But if I'm writing an email to you, it doesn't have the exact context that you swung by the Google office and we had a coffee and we went to that secret room, and adding some element of those thoughts where we talked about build versus buy the pool table in the secret room. And we talked about maybe,
by the way, that's a real place. The secret room is pretty cool.
It's a real spot, but that would make an email from me to you far more personal than the generic thing it might write. And I think there's value in people still putting in that energy and still taking the output and refining it, because if you work a lot with AI, it will help create things and help you get further faster. But becomes very obvious to people that you're interacting with over time when it's not informed by human as a companion to what it's doing. So just an aside on that, but I think that's like a valuable piece. So that's where the connectors are super valuable, because it helps bring in a bunch of that. But there's still this piece that you should, I think, before and after the input and output, add some value. That might just be a personal opinion, but I can pretty quickly differentiate things now. And I think people, I think you see it on LinkedIn a lot.
Oh yeah.
And I think people are quickly checking out and scrolling past like content spam because there's not a lot of unique thought left in that piece. And so they're scrolling past it. But when you see pieces like with a unique perspective built in, people might still know or not know that AI was used in it, but you're still offering value. So don't take the value out of whatever you're doing, I guess is the point.
I love that.
A random side tangent, but operational things and administrative things, I think, are an area that offer a lot of value to all roles. It's funny because I think one of the big use cases that came out really early in AI was like transcribed meeting notes.
Right.
And everyone sort of brushed that off. Like, oh, like we're trying to justify the ROI. But like, can we pause for a moment of how much efficiency just that single thing brings in like people sitting like heads down typing in a meeting is far less of a thing. So you're actually engaged in the conversation because you're actively listening, not actively typing. And how does that change the value and context of that meeting? Oh, shoot, I missed a follow-up item that I forgot to write this thing. Like, that just makes the in-meeting and post-meeting experience so much more efficient. And we sort of glossed over that was like not that valuable of a reason to start using some of these tools, but like, we need to pause for a moment. Like,
I agree.
We go like 10 or 15 or 20 years back. We used to bring people to meetings just for that purpose because we understood the value that a note taker could bring to a meeting. And so, yeah, I think
It's
like
true.
operational tasks are a big piece.
It's interesting because it's usually we think of the flashy, sexy examples for AI, but where, and we'll get to this in a little bit later on, but where companies are seeing the most value are these like, you know, relatively boring or mundane tasks that are, you know, consistent, they are repeatable, and therefore you're not dealing with too many different heuristics or different variables. You can get a reliable, repeatable output, right? But you're right. I mean, sometimes we forget how far we've gone on things like meeting notes, which, by the way, I think are, and regardless of the platform, like they are reliable. Like you do trust them versus before it was are they really going to get it right? They actually get it better than I think humans do when you're missing key points because you're looking at everything through your own lens or your own perspective, you know? Um, so on the topic of productivity gains, you know, in the dev world, as you know, it's like the holy grail of productivity is like the 10x developer, right? It's like faster, better, you know, than the average developer. Do you see that holding true for the average sales rep? Like, is AI sort of that 10x productivity multiplier for sales reps?
I I think it does a few things. So even if you just isolate to the example that I was talking about earlier of like retrieving information,
Yeah.
like that's a lot of time.
Yep.
Like prepping for a meeting, whether you do or don't, you should add value to that meeting.
Yeah.
Adds value to that meeting, would take a lot of time to do well. So I think it's going to help the best sellers be even more engaged in the EQ elements, the collective problem solving, the active listening elements of sales that are important because I think despite all of these things, people still buy from people. And there's a lot of
Yeah.
technology out there that is, yes, there's lots of differentiators, but at some level, some of it starts to feel commoditized. And so you start to actually determine, is the person that I'm working with in my court going to help me, listening, actually understanding my problems? And so I think it frees up some of that like operational capacity to be all in.
Yeah.
The second is that I think it helps people ramp to a certain bar faster. So whether you're a new employee in an organization, I very much felt this. Like again, like almost 15 years at Microsoft, I've been like just maybe over 4 months at Google.
Yeah.
That ramp, I can't imagine how long it would take if I wasn't able to like quickly ask questions, retrieve information, pull things together in the way I am now because of AI. So I think it helps you ramp to things faster. It also helps people build confidence. So like if you're about to say something or you need just a refresher, you're able to retrieve again that information in a succinct way faster, learn on it faster. So that building of confidence is also the piece that I think is super important for people that are maybe more junior in their careers
Yeah.
because they can get advice, coaching. Oh, I didn't think of that.
Mm-hmm.
The only asterisk I share around that is when people only do that. So if you're using it as a tool to be better and to learn and grow, it will create a supercharged scenario. If you create a dependency on that where that's all you do, it won't, it's like maybe I don't know, this is like hypothetical, but like if that's what people did and they never pushed themselves to use it as a tool to be better, then like maybe you would just have like a bunch of like people that are like a 3 out of 10 operating at like a 6 out of 10. And maybe that would be fine for companies, but it won't make you the 10. That piece is the piece that comes with experience, but it does help people that maybe don't have that experience get a feedback loop. They can, run mock scenarios with like, I think when I was in my first 30 days at Google, one of my onboarding trainings, there's like lots of trainings at tech companies.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's fine. It's good. A lot of it was duplicative. The one that was cool and I hadn't done before, honestly, it was a role play with an AI agent. And I'm
Okay.
that's not, again, I guess it's not, maybe it is mind blowing. I don't know. I hadn't done it yet. That's the point.
Yeah.
And in my first month, I did this. And to your, like, do the why Google pitch. And normally you would like tie in some people in the room, get feedback from them, get sign off. They're like, do we distract broader business on this as the first 100 level of your training? And you can do this with this AI role play. But that can be brought into so many other scenarios. It can be a two-way, like I'm speaking,
Yeah.
it's speaking back, or even just with text, like, hey, I anticipate these 5 objections. Here's how I'm thinking about answering it. Where are my blind spots? Like, who normally you'd ask your manager that every time.
Yeah.
You have a personal coach that's very responsive and very fast. And I think that's transformative for top sellers or new sellers or people transferring companies.
I think you've hit on so many good points. I think about, by the way, I think it's probably not 10x, but probably 50x when you really start to map out all the productivity gains that you get. I think the piece around becoming reliant on it as a crutch instead of this like enabler or unlock, I think is a problem we're going to have with the new generation coming in. I mean, I've got kids that are now, one's a high school and one's sort of middle school, and they do use it like a calculator. But when I see the generation or the cohort more broadly, I feel like part of doing it manually was like doing the hard work and having to think critically, and the answer, you had to work really hard to get that answer. So I think the challenge is then going to be, how do you get people to perceive the tool or use the tool with that intention of being an unlock instead of being an easy button? I don't know what the effect of that's going to be, but from our vantage point where we've lived without it, I just wonder if the new generation will have that same perspective or not.
It's a tough sandwich, right? Because I think there's people who have not had it and are like resistant to it,
Yeah.
and like there's no way, or like they just don't know how to use it, or they don't want to use it. And so like there's that piece of the sandwich. Then there's the piece of the sandwich that you're saying, which they're like dependent on it, but actually that group's probably becoming like, the skill that they will develop is different than the skill of history, which is they'll be better at prompting, or they'll be better at, using those tools to get further. And so, and then there's probably like a group in the middle that are like not as savvy and high adopters, but users and believe, who are still bringing some of that history. I don't know what it'll emerge to be. I don't think that like everyone will become so dependent on it where it's just like AI answering AI responses, because I think even those people sending them know when they're getting that back. And so like you'll start to, someone will break the cycle. So I think there's like, we're just in an early stage. And so I think in that early stage, people use the tool in the most basic way possible. So right now they're just like, let me just use it for everything, until they're like challenged. So I don't know what that like challenge will be, but it'll be like, okay, I may be similar to like my feeling right now about going on LinkedIn. And this is not a me feeling. Like, I've talked to a lot of people, and this is like a real feeling right now where you're just like, I just don't know if there's a lot of value in me opening it, because like the messages are like,
generated.
Yeah, like it's not boilerplate anymore. And like the content, it's like, if you were to like bring up a thought, maybe this is just like another fun aside of the podcast, but like find a piece of content that you feel is AI generated, and like go to that person when you see them next and try to like have a meaningful conversation on that topic, and just like see how it goes.
And they're like, I have no idea what you're talking about.
Yeah, like
you said that.
Oh, I didn't even read that book. But like, it's like, actually, like when I had my startup podcast, people would like use that as like the icebreaker, because it feels like the right thing. Like, oh, it's so cool you have a podcast. Like, I'll listen to your podcast. I'm like, which episode?
The
crickets. Right? Yeah. And I think that the same thing's happening. So I think there'll be a moment where people are gonna kind of, there'll be a natural evolution of it, where the upper margins will become not as interesting. Like the people that are just dependent on it, the people that have not adopted it. I think that's what we hear a lot about, like use it or be like whatever. But that middle chunk will evolve to be like super powerful, I think, and using it. Some people, they're their superpower will be a little bit more history and historical
Mm.
knowledge of the problem solving. And on the
Yeah.
bottom of the spectrum, maybe they'll make up for that with better prompting and better connectivity and operations, and they'll meet to some level of excellence together.
Yeah. Yeah. No, we'll see. We'll see. Is it's like we're living through, obviously, like we're living through history right now, right? We're going to see how this is all going to shake out. I wanted to go back to the example you had around the simulation, and it's interesting because as we talked on this a couple weeks ago. One of the innovations that we've developed is called Sales Dojo, which is a AI powered sort of a training ground. Sellers can kind of pick different personalities or members of the buying committee, and it's kind of like role play with a CFO as an example, and get the objections and talk through the different scenarios and the value props and feedback we hear all the time from sales teams is like, okay, yes, you want me to go to sort of the different members of the buying committee, but like I don't really know how to talk to a head of HR or a head of ops or a head of procurement. I don't know, just based on your experience with your training at Google and what you did with the simulation, do you think that's sort of the standard or the future of like sales coaching and sales training for you going through that? How effective did you find that? And do you see that really becoming the new standard?
Yeah, I think it's a tool. I think people would or should benefit from using it. I think what'll be interesting is sometimes you have a false sense of confidence that they've been in those scenarios. And so that it's like repetition. But I think you very quickly learn, and I quickly learned with this was like the tangents. Like I've seen a healthy amount of scenarios. So like when you prep, you're like, okay, like I've reviewed the like why Google slide deck. Like I've kind of had these conversations. Like
Yeah.
these are like the 5 or 6 permutations that like a conversation like this could maybe take. But like it's the curveballs of like out of sequencing you, or like a complete different conversation you haven't had, or something you missed and them calling you out on it. Like I think the confidence you have of having done things before, it challenges that confidence. But if you can do it in a safe space, because like you wouldn't want to go do that with peers often, because you're like, oh, like I don't want to feel, people don't like to feel like they don't know something.
Of course.
And like earlier in your career journey, that's maybe not as hard to be like, I'm learning. And the best is people that are not, it's like that learn it all versus know it all. But even people who will say I'm learn it all rarely will be like, I actually don't understand. Like, can you, like, even though they do want to learn it all in a public forum, probably they wouldn't pause to be like, I actually don't know what that means. Can you help me understand?
Yeah.
So I think this creates a private forum for learning.
Right.
That replicates that vulnerable scenario. And that's where it's super powerful. I think it should become a bigger piece, and it would help people be better. The only piece I don't know is like, actually, maybe this is that piece where it's like, if you only prepped with AI
Mm.
and you only engaged in those conversations, you'll miss the curveball that an actual client or customer gives you.
Yeah.
Vice versa, if you only ever talk to customers and clients, you'll treat everyone with, you're pulling knowledge from previous experiences, but maybe you haven't taken a different approach, which the
Yeah.
AI role playing might take you down.
It is interesting because it sounds like there's value in both, but like you got to talk to real people and feel different personalities and so forth. So, but yeah, no, it's super interesting.
The other piece just on that it's funny when you said personalities, sorry, it just triggered something, which is like,
Yeah.
meetings are not like a present out. Like the other piece that it will never be able to replicate is like what the moments before a meeting starts look and feel like, and the moments after,
Yeah.
or the text that maybe a client sends, or that walk back to the elevators you're exiting and they like mention something, and how you use that, or how you remember like their kid's name or their recent trip. Like that's why I think you have to pair the two things together. And I think if used right, it helps you get some of the fundamentals and some of the operations simpler, so you can divert more time and energy to those elements of it and bring it all together.
Which I think, to that point, if we can focus more on that if we're getting some of the fundamentals down. I think fewer people are good at what you just talked about, which is picking up on cues and that walk back to the elevator and the text and that kind of thing. I think that we can be unlocked to do more of that stuff. So no, it's very cool. I wanted to ask you, I'm not sure if you've seen Matt Dixon's research in his book JOLT Effect, and he's at 60% of qualified pipe sales teams will lose to indecision, not no decision. So basically, it's making no decision is safer than making the wrong one. And he talks about like three main drivers: valuation problems, which is, I don't know, one saying it's faster, one saying it's more secure. What are the vectors that I should evaluate it on? This sense of lack of information, which is like, haven't done my homework, I don't feel knowledgeable enough. And then the classic one around outcome uncertainty, which is they're telling me I'm going to get a 10x. I don't know if I'm actually going to get that. So I'd love to hear your take on that when you come across that research. What do you think of it, A, and B, how does AI help sellers kind of overcome some of these things? I'd love to get your thoughts on that.
So I haven't seen the research. So I'll go take a look at and do some learning on that. I might start with the AI summary and then find the podcast and go from there. I get the premise, which is there's a stalling at the 60% sales cycle. Maybe the percentage is relevant, maybe it's not, but there's some stalling and indecision, which is not to your point, it's like, it's easier to just not sometimes make the decision. Sometimes that's like people going down a path of exploration, how they're building the ROI and whether they actually have the budget and the right KPIs. But I think for those things that you mentioned, so you mentioned a piece around figuring out the ROI of the solution. There was the validation. I think you talked about like who else is doing it, and then there's the unknown. Like, how will I know this to be true? So I think we'll talk the last one last, but at least for the first two, that comes back to like quickly being able to retrieve customer examples, detailed references. Ideally being able to get those people in contact. So the retrieval of that information and the being able to create those bridges. On the first one, I think we actually just recently did this. Someone on my team, we went into this similar scenario of like, hey, there's like this laundry list of scenarios or use cases that they are mentally thinking through for AI, and in this scenario, agent space, and then what are the extensions of build versus buy. And so it is a first draft. I would call it a first draft because with inputs, it'll get better. But it's like, hey, based on what is known about this industry for this scenario times number of employees and how they're going to use it, here's a range. And so what's funny is in that they're like, well, the client actually said like, oh, like this is AI generated. Okay. Yes. However, the scenarios are accurate. I think in your own, whether your ROI calculation or AI's, this just lets you very quickly play with the inputs. So if they're able to collaborate on those inputs, we can feed those inputs in and get to the answers very quickly. Otherwise, maybe you got to like go to finance, go run some spreadsheets, wait for that. You can compress that cycle if both people are at the table willing to be collaborative. Like, okay, great. So then what do you pay these people? What is this item cost? What is the frequency of this? How many people are going to use this? How frequently are they going to, and then you can get to the answer better. So you can give it the inputs and it'll very quickly recompute those things. And you can be like, well, it hasn't thought about this. You can play with those scenarios at warp speed. And so I think that 60% in the trying to figure out your ROI calculations is like, you can use this as an assistive tool when both parties are collectively coming together and sharing information.
At incredible speed, right? And running different models, different scenarios.
Yeah. Oh, let us go take this away for 3 weeks with the finance team and run the risk model. And it's like, for the first cut, like, let's go through it fast and like figure out what makes the most sense. So you've got an assistive tool that is a additional person at the party that you can kind of work on this with. The second is like the retrieval of that information. I think the third, which is, will we know? That is like famous for anything. like it's in so many scenarios. But I think the one piece that is a watch in that, and I see it a lot in technology.
Yeah.
I'm not as deep in some of the other industries, but the theme I see across technology is AI is a really good example of this. They're like, I'm not going to start using it until it can do all of those things.
Yeah.
And that's sort of like the analogy that I've come up with is I'm not ever going to start driving a car until I can buy a Ferrari. And so like that end state, like Ferraris keep getting more expensive relative to what you make. So like that is getting like out of range. And similarly, like the end state of what will be solved with AI, today you're declaring, oh, when it can do this. But when it gets to that point, you're gonna be like, it's moved so far past that your expectations change. And so I think at some level,
Yep.
that statement is balanced by what are you willing to start with? And how are you giving it the appropriate time, space, and shot to be determined if it's useful? And that's not a 30-day POC, honestly, right? Like you're talking about a tool
Which is what
that
they want,
requires
right?
change management, right? So I think on that last one, the piece that's always tough on there is like it takes bold people to start. And if you're either going to be a laggard to this, which you'll lose out on the gains, you'll be a first mover, which you'll have probably spent a bit of inefficiency and money, but you will maybe see a breakthrough faster. And then there's the middle group who are like adopting, but in a fast follow, but not waiting. And I think the tricky piece is because of people feeling like there's like an AI bubble, they're looking for like the single perfect solution. And I think what we've learned is like most AI solutions will get you 90% there. And a lot of the build, a lot of the final mile. They actually talked about this on the All In podcast, like last mile delivery concept.
Yeah.
But like that last mile is where SaaS companies are customizing this to solve I think you talked about earlier, very specific niche, sometimes boring problems, and they're getting it 90% to 98%. If you're waiting for 100%, you're waiting a long time because that 2% keeps changing. So I think it's about putting a meaningful bet against it and going all in. It's sort of like if I'm going on a weight loss journey, I'm not doing it for like 4 weeks and be like, oh, I'm not like shredded and fit and my VO2 max didn't go up. Like it's consistency over time. It is commitment. It is evolving with it. It is learning and feedback loop. So that last piece, well, some of it's true. I think part of it comes down to like, are the people at the table truly invested in wanting to see this bring efficiency and bring value and try it? And that's different. That's like you can do as many TCOs. Some people just, they won't be there.
Yeah.
And it shouldn't be like, hey, it has to be free for me to try it.
Yeah.
Probably most organizations wouldn't give their stuff for free for that period of time to determine if it's valuable. Like, oh, I want a couch for 6 months to know if it's going to be like comfortable. And I get it. Some companies will be like, yes, 1 month free. If not happy with your mattress, we'll take it back. But like the point is at mass, I think there's some level of it. You have to feel good enough about the bet and then go in.
And to your point, it is a bet. There's an element of risk. And if you're waiting for somebody to take all the risk off the table, then you're going to be waiting forever, right? And the further and further behind you get. But I think I really loved how you position that. And I think it's bang on. There's been a lot of dialogue around whether we are in an AI bubble. And so that MIT paper that was floating around, pretty broadly, around 95% of corporate AI pilots failing, which interestingly enough, most of the use cases in the report were sales and marketing. But from where you sit, what's your take? Do you think that that's true? Do you think mind you, the research was based on, I think, 52 interviews and not based on real financial data, but what's your take on this? Are we in an AI bubble?
I think we're in a AI pilot bubble. I think people are POCing and building things, and maybe not all the right people are at the table. And there's more of a bottoms up organic approach that helps, I think, in some of this adoption. I I don't think we're in an AI bubble. I think we're maybe in a hype cycle
Yep.
where like the board is asking for like, what's our AI strategy? So therefore something must happen. So like we're solving the wrong problems, or we're coming at it with a different intention.
Yeah.
Uh, but also I think some of the ROI maybe is muddier. It's, you know, um, I guess it's maybe even similar to like in the world of marketing, like billboards or
Mm.
TV ads. Like you get a certain top line funnel, and it's not always as easy to track to conversion. Like you can put like links and
Right. Right.
all that attribution. But I think in some regard, even the scenario we talked about, like on meeting notes, like people would be like, would very quickly dismiss that as like not that valuable. I think you can put a real price on that. It's just, are you
Hmm.
willing? So I think some of the scenarios are muddier. I think people are sometimes piloting for the sake of piloting.
Yeah.
Uh, People are not meaningfully going all in for long enough periods of time to truly be able to advocate the effects. Um, and then I think the last one is people are waiting to buy a Ferrari until they start driving. So I think those things combined are leading to like a lot of stop start pilots.
Yeah.
They're throwing money at things, and it's like the speed of an outcome. I think those, I don't think it's a bubble because the people in it that are using the tools feel the benefits.
Mm. It's real.
Right?
Yeah.
It's very real. There's real value and benefits. What's I think being harder is people being able to like in absolute terms get to this perfect spreadsheet example of efficiency. And it's sometimes muddier or sometimes not being run for a long enough period of time. It's like when people make a CapEx investment, they don't like wait 3 months to be like, was it worth it? Like,
Yeah. Of course.
so the payback period. So I think there's a bit of hype. I think there's many different approaches. I think the ones that I see that are being most successful are making meaningful, longer range bets. I don't think that needs to be a 5-year bet, but like you need to give it time. You need to give it energy. You need to give it the right level of change management and support. Oh, we deployed it to all 3,000 of our staff, but all 3,000 aren't using it. Like,
What training and
yeah, and like
support have you given
what's
them?
your traditional adoption curve of new technology, and how quickly and what's that look like? People said the same thing about like when I was at Microsoft Teams, but just generally like virtual calls and like what's the adoption of like messaging and video calls, and then like this catalyst called COVID came along and like adoption spiked everywhere.
Yeah.
Like you could like the adoption was incredible, but I think that was just a forcing function of what would happen over a slightly longer period of time. And no,
It was inevitable.
Yeah. So I'm not saying, hey, I hope something like a COVID comes along to accelerate the value and adoption of AI. But I think that there's like a longer adoption curve to new technology than people sometimes give it.
Yeah.
And they don't surround it with the proper support and patience to derive the value. And they don't ask themselves, if 20% of the org were using this often, are we getting enough value? They sometimes set the bar. Oftentimes, I guess, coming full circle to the beginning of this, like sales versus marketing, is the number you're chasing like how many people are using this regularly, or has a subset of our investment more than capitalized the reason we've done this, and how can we bring the rest along, right? If 200 of your 1,000 users create enough efficiency to more than pay for that 1,000 user deployment,
Exactly.
that's your payback period, and now the rest is upside. So then, anyway, maybe I'm overcomplicating it, but
no, I think you're bang on, and I think going back to what you said a bit earlier around solving the right problems, I think that's really key because it's people I think are stuck at this sort of innovation theater type of thing of like, hey, we're doing AI, like we're doing AI here and there, and you're almost, I see in some cases companies trying to create a problem to solve just based on an AI capability versus really putting the technology aside and saying, what are we trying to solve? Like, is it an even meaningful problem? Quantify the problem. Is that a big enough problem to solve? Yes, then let's go make the investment and, explore like a meaningful AI use case. And, to your point, it's not magic. It takes time. There's like a human element of this. There's the human barriers, which in that MIT report, that was one of the number one points of friction is like human adoption and human pushback to using some of these tools. So, but yeah, no, really enjoyed the chat, Mike, and I know you're a busy guy, so we'll let you get back to your day job. But really appreciate you coming on, and always fun chatting with you, Mike.
I appreciate you having me on, and thanks for the chat today, Andrew. Lots of big topics. We'll see how they evolve over time, and I'll check into the Chat B2B pod to see how my opinion matches or doesn't match with some others, and maybe we can have a healthy discussion over dinner with a group over sometime.
Yeah, I love it.